A billionaire took his son on a blind date and met a single mother. What he did changed everything forever. A story of second chances and true love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The February sun beat down on the sidewalks of Williamsburg with that typical summer intensity, making the asphalt sweat with a humid heat that rose in invisible waves. Richard Allen parked his black Mercedes-Benz in front of Corner Cafe, a charming corner establishment with exposed brick walls and large glass windows offering a prime view of the street's hustle and bustle. At 42, he was one of the most respected and feared names in the American tech industry. His business management app dominated the corporate market, and his fortune was estimated in figures that most people couldn't even pronounce. "Dad, do I really have to do this?" Ethan's voice came out low, almost a whisper. The 12-year-old shrank into the beige leather seat of the car, his thin, pale fingers nervously drumming on the backpack he held in his lap. He was too skinny for his age, with dark circles that seemed permanent under his brown eyes, the same eyes as his mother who had left them 3 years ago. Richard took a deep breath, adjusting his navy blue Hermes tie that suddenly felt tight around his neck. He had built an empire from scratch, negotiated with international investors, commanded million-dollar mergers, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him to deal with the empty gaze of his only son. "Ethan, the doctors were clear. You need—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "A healthy female presence in your life, someone who isn't specifically paid for it, like in therapists." "But you're paying this woman to meet with me," Ethan shot back, with that relentless logic he inherited from his father. "It's the same thing." Richard closed his eyes for a second. The boy was right, but he was desperate. 3 years without his mother, 7 different therapists, 2 hospitalizations for anxiety crises, plummeting grades, progressive social isolation. He needed to do something radical. "Let's go in," Richard said, stepping out of the car with executive determination. "Trust me." The interior of the cafe was cozy, with that unmistakable aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans mixed with the sweet smell of homemade pastries. 6 rustic wooden tables were scattered throughout the space, decorated with hanging plants and shelves filled with used books. An indie music playlist played softly, the voice of John Mayer filling the gaps between whispered conversations. Sarah Miller was sitting at the last table in the back, near the window that overlooked a small indoor garden. She checked her watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, 4:15 in the afternoon. He was late. Of course he was. Doctors were always late. She knew this type well. Working at General Hospital for 8 years had taught her that. At 34, Sarah carried the tired beauty of someone who fought against the world daily. Brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, delicate features marked by a fierce determination in her green eyes. She still wore her light blue nurse uniform, with discreet stains of coffee and medicine that even bleach couldn't completely remove. She hadn't had time to go home to change. She had come straight from a 24-hour shift, leaving Lily with Mrs. Celine, the neighbor from the apartment next door, and took 2 buses and a subway to cross the city from Queens to Williamsburg. Under her uniform, she hid the only decent dress she owned, a simple dark green knit model she had bought on sale 3 years ago. She had planned to change in the cafe's restroom, but now, looking around at the trendy customers in the bohemian neighborhood with their vintage thrift store clothes and imported sneakers, she felt completely out of place. "Are you Sarah?" The deep, controlled male voice came from behind her. She turned around, preparing the polite smile she had rehearsed mentally throughout the trip. The first thing she noticed was the expensive tie, then the impeccable haircut, the intense brown eyes, the square jaw with a perfectly trimmed stubble, and then, beside him, a boy who seemed to want to disappear into his own skin. "Yes, I'm Sarah," she replied, extending her hand with a smile that began to falter when she realized he didn't reciprocate the gesture. "You must be Dr. Richard." "Just Richard," he corrected, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. Ethan remained standing, clearly uncomfortable. "And this is my son, Ethan." Sarah blinked, confused. The description on the dating app was clear. Surgeon, divorced, no, kids. She had checked 3 times before accepting the date. "I didn't understand. The profile said that—" "Yes, about that," Richard interrupted, with that direct tone of someone used to leading business meetings. "I need to be honest with you. I'm not here looking for a romantic relationship." Sarah's blood began to boil, rising from her neck to her cheeks. She felt the familiar wave of humiliation, the same feeling she had when she was a child, and other kids laughed because her clothes came from donations when she was a teenager and couldn't afford the prom trip. When she got pregnant at 24 and Lily's father vanished without looking back. "So why the hell did you make me come all the way here?" The words came out harsher than she intended, but she was too tired to care about subtleties. Richard seemed genuinely surprised by her tone, as if he wasn't used to being confronted. He adjusted himself in the chair, regaining his composure. "Because I have a proposal for you. I read your profile carefully. Nurse, single mother, working 70 hours a week. I need— hire someone to take care of Ethan." The coffee that Sarah had ordered, a cappuccino that cost half of what she had in her wallet, was lukewarm in front of her. She looked at the boy, who seemed to wish the ground would swallow him, and then turned her eyes to Richard Allen with a fury that had been building since she woke up at 5 in the morning the day before to start her shift. "You brought me here," she began, her voice trembling but firm, "made me cross this entire city, leave my daughter with the neighbor, spend the bus and subway money that I don't have. Where? My best dress under this uniform because I didn't even have time to go home and change." She was now standing, hands on the table. "All this to offer me a babysitting job." "It's not babysitting, it's—" "What is it?" Sarah cut in, feeling tears of anger burning her eyes. "An opportunity, a chance. Let me guess. You investigated my life, know that I'm financially screwed. Think you can just wave money and I'll jump like a puppy." Other people in the cafe began to look. Ethan stepped back, eyes wide. Richard stood up as well, trying to control the situation. "Sarah, please, if you would just let me explain." "No," she said, grabbing her worn-out bag. "You don't need to explain anything. I understand perfectly. For you, people like me are just another problem that can be solved with money. Just another service to be hired." She grabbed the half-full cappuccino cup and, before she could think twice, threw the lukewarm liquid in Richard Allen's face. The coffee dripped down his expensive tie, splattered on his tailored suit, leaving brown stains on his Italian white shirt. The entire cafe went silent. Even the sound of John Mayer seemed to fade. Richard stood frozen, coffee dripping from his chin, completely shocked. No one, absolutely no one, had ever done something like that to him since— never. And then, in the absolute silence that followed, Sarah heard something unexpected. A laugh. Low, almost imperceptible, but definitely a laugh. She looked at Ethan and saw, on the pale boy's face, the ghost of a smile, the first genuine expression he had shown in months, as Richard would later discover. But Sarah didn't stay to see that. She walked through the cafe with her head held high, ignoring the stares, and stepped out into the sweltering afternoon heat. Her hands trembled as she searched for her phone in her bag to check how much credit she had left on her transit card. She needed to get home, pick up Lily from Mrs. Celia's house, prepare dinner with whatever was left in the fridge, As she walked toward the subway station, tears finally streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from pure frustration. For a stupid moment, she had allowed herself to have hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone wanted to know her for who she really was. Not as a mother, not as a nurse, not as someone needing saving, just as Sarah. "What an idiot," she murmured to herself, wiping her face with the back of her hand as she descended the station stairs. "What an idiot." Behind her, in Corner Cafe, Richard Allen remained motionless, coffee dripping from his face, while his son wore that small smile on his lips, the first sign of life in 3 long years. And for the first time since he founded his company, since he made his first million, since he lost his wife, Richard had absolutely no idea what to do next. 3 days later, Sarah's grueling routine continued its relentless pace. Monday, 6 in the morning, and she was already in the pediatric wing of the General Hospital, pushing the medication cart while checking the patient list for her shift. The characteristic smell of the hospital, a mix of disinfectant, reheated food, and that indefinable odor of illness, no longer bothered her. 8 years working there had dulled her senses to many things. "Sarah, there's a new admission in room 412. Carla, the nursing technician who shared the shift with her, informed. 12-year-old. A boy, severe anxiety crisis, came straight from the ER in the early morning. What's the status?" Sarah asked, making notes on her clipboard without looking up. "Tachycardia, hyperventilation, couldn't calm down even with Xanax. The father is in there with him. Seems like he hasn't slept at all." Sarah nodded, finishing organizing the medications in the cart before heading to room 412. It was 7 in the morning on an ordinary Monday, and she had no idea that the next 5 minutes would completely change the course of the following months. She lightly knocked on the ajar door and entered the room. The first thing she saw was the boy in the bed, pale with electrodes stuck to his skinny chest, connected to a heart monitor that emitted regular beeps. Brown hair tousled over his sweaty forehead, and then she recognized him. Ethan. Her gaze flew to the corner of the room, where a male figure was seated in the hospital chair, completely slumped. Richard Allen had his elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped over his head, still wearing the same suit from 3 days ago, now completely wrinkled. The tie was stuffed into the pocket of his jacket. The stubble had turned into a few days' worth of beard, and when he lifted his face upon hearing the door, Sarah saw dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. The recognition was mutual and instant. Richard stood up so quickly that he almost tripped over his own briefcase abandoned on the floor. "Sarah!" It wasn't a question, it was almost a plea. She froze for a second, all the angry words she had ruminated over the last 3 days evaporating from her tongue. Because there in that hospital room with cruel fluorescent light, she didn't see the arrogant billionaire from the cafe. She saw a broken father. I didn't know that." "You worked here," Richard said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I swear I didn't." "How long has he been like this?" Sarah cut in, already in professional mode, approaching the bed. Ethan was sedated, breathing deeply, but even in sleep his face showed tension. "It started last night. Richard ran a hand through his hair, making it even messier. "He couldn't breathe. He thought he was going to die. I rushed him here. The doctors gave him medication. He calmed down, but they said he needs to be monitored." Sarah checked the heart monitor, verified the blood pressure, examined the medical chart hanging at the bedside. Acute anxiety attack, history of generalized anxiety disorder, had been hospitalized before for a similar situation 6 months ago. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked, still not looking at Richard. "I can't." He returned to the chair, collapsing into it as if every muscle in his body ached. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him struggling to breathe, thinking he's going to die, and I didn't know what to do. I never know what to do." There was something in his voice, a crack, a fracture in the facade that made Sarah stop. She looked at him for real now. Richard Allen, the tech billionaire who thought he could buy solutions, was completely shattered. Mr. Allen. Richard, he corrected automatically. Please. Richard, she repeated, the name strange on her tongue. You need to go home, take a shower, sleep for a few hours. Ethan will be fine. I'll be here taking care of him. No. The response was immediate, almost aggressive. I can't leave him alone. What if he wakes up and I'm not here? What if he thinks I've abandoned him too? The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah pulled the plastic chair closer to the bed and sat down, her eyes moving from Ethan to Richard. Is that what your ex-wife did? Abandoned you both? Richard let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor. Abandoning implies she left something behind. Christina didn't abandon, she simply evaporated. One day she was here, the next day she had a one-way ticket to London and a note saying she needed to find herself. Ethan was 9 years old, and he never recovered. How could he? Richard looked at his sleeping son, and Sarah saw something break in his face. First, the mother disappears. Then the father is a workaholic who barely knows how to talk to him. Ethan completely shut down. He stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping. The anxiety attack started a year ago. He thinks everyone he loves will leave. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest, that professional empathy every nurse needs to control to avoid being destroyed, but which sometimes slips through the cracks. And the proposal at the cafe, she said slowly. Was it because you thought a woman, any woman, would solve this? Not just any woman. Richard finally looked at her straight in the eyes. The psychologist said Ethan needs to see a healthy female role model, someone strong, independent, who doesn't crumble. Someone like you. You don't know me. I know, he admitted, rubbing his face with his hands. It was ridiculous, I know. But I was desperate. I'm desperate. And when you threw that coffee at me, you must have hated me. Ethan smiled. The words came out simple, but heavy with weight. For the first time in months, my son smiled. Do you know why? Because you were real. You didn't pretend, you weren't polite, you didn't feel sorry. You got angry and showed it. It was the most human thing he had seen in a long time. Sarah didn't know what to say. She looked at Ethan, at that young face calm from the sedative, and saw her own daughter. Lily also knew abandonment. Her father had disappeared before she was even born, leaving Sarah pregnant and alone at 24. But Lily had something Ethan clearly didn't have. She had Sarah every day, present and steady as a rock. Look, Sarah began, choosing her words carefully. I understand that you're hurting. I understand that you're scared. But you can't just hire someone to love your son. It doesn't work that way. I know, Richard said so quietly she almost didn't hear him. I'm sorry for everything, for how I proposed, for the fake app, for being an arrogant idiot thinking money solves everything. The raw honesty caught her off guard. Sarah fell silent, watching the heart monitor blink its green numbers in the dim light of the room. How long will he be here? She finally asked. The doctor said at least a week, maybe 2, depending on how he responds. Sarah nodded, getting up. Then I'll see him every day, not as a hired babysitter, she added quickly when she saw Richard open his mouth, but because it's part of my job. I'm a nurse on this floor. Ethan is my patient now. Sarah, and you, she interrupted, pointing a firm finger in his direction, are going home, now. Go take a shower, eat something real, sleep for at least 4 hours. Then you can come back, but this way you're no good for him. Or for yourself. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but something in Sarah's gaze, that unshakable authority of someone who has spent years dealing with medical emergencies, made him close it. He nodded, defeated, picking up the folder from the floor. "Are you really going to take care of him?" The question came out vulnerable, almost childlike. "I said I would," Sarah replied, already adjusting Ethan's IV. "And when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Now get out of here before I change my mind." Richard walked to the door but stopped with his hand on the doorknob. "Thank you," he said without turning around. "And I'm sorry. Truly." When the door closed behind him, Sarah let out a long sigh and sat back down next to Ethan's bed. The boy stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible in his sleep. She adjusted the blanket over him, an automatic gesture she made. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, still groggy from the medication. The first thing he saw was Sarah, sitting beside his bed, taking notes on a clipboard. When she noticed he was awake, she smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Hi, Ethan. Do you remember me?" The boy blinked, processing, and then his lips curved into the same small smile from that afternoon at the corner cafe. "You spilled coffee on my dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "I did," Sarah admitted without shame. "He deserved it." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan let out a weak but real laugh. The following 2 weeks established a strange and unexpected routine. Sarah worked her regular shifts in the pediatric ward, 12 hours from 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening, 4 days a week. But even on her days off, she showed up in room 412, not out of professional obligation, but because Ethan had started asking for her. "Where's the angry nurse?" he would ask the other night shift staff. "The one who spilled coffee on my dad?" The story had spread through the hospital like wildfire. The staff whispered in the corridors, speculating about the relationship between the nurse from Queens and the billionaire from Wall Street. Sarah ignored the glances and comments with the same determination she applied to everything in life. Head held high, focus on the job. It was a Thursday afternoon, the 10th day of Ethan's hospitalization, when Sarah entered the room not with the usual medications, but with a crumpled plastic bag from the market. "What's this?" Ethan asked, sitting up in bed with a sketchbook on his lap. He had started drawing again, sketching manga characters that Sarah didn't recognize, but pretended to admire. "Ingredients," she replied mysteriously, placing the bag on the bedside table. "I heard you like carrot cake." Ethan's eyes widened. "How do you know?" "Your dad mentioned it." In fact, Richard had mentioned many things during the brief conversations they exchanged when he came to visit, usually in the late afternoon after, spending the day at the office, trying to manage the company remotely. He never stayed long, always uncomfortable, always seeming not to know where to put his hands or what to say to his son. "But are you going to make it here?" Ethan looked around the hospital room, confused. "Of course not, silly." Sarah rolled her eyes affectionately. "I'll make it at my place and bring it tomorrow, but I need to know, with chocolate frosting or without." "With," Ethan replied immediately, then hesitated. "But you don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed, picking up the sketchbook to examine the drawings more closely. "Wow, you're really good at this. These lines here, this shading. Do you take classes?" Ethan shook his head, blushing slightly at the compliment. "I taught myself, watching videos on YouTube, copying from the mangas I read." "Did your mom like your drawings?" The question slipped out before Sarah could think better of it, and she immediately regretted it when she saw Ethan's face close off. But to her surprise, after a long silence, he answered, "She never saw. I started drawing after she left." His voice was low, too controlled for a 12-year-old. "It's kind of... when I draw, I can stop thinking about other things." Sarah understood perfectly. Lily did the same thing with her childhood stories, creating entire worlds where everything ended well, where parents didn't abandon daughters, where mothers didn't have to work 70 hours a week to pay the bills. "I understand," she said simply, handing back the sketchbook. "Sometimes we need to create our own world when the real one is too heavy." Ethan looked at her with those intense brown eyes, so similar to his father's, and Sarah saw recognition there. Not pity, not condescension, but true understanding. "Do you do that too?" he asked. "I do. When I get really stressed about work or worried about bills, I pretend I'm on a beach in the Caribbean. I've never been to one, but I imagine it's amazing." "Why have you never gone?" Sarah shrugged, being honest. "Traveling is expensive when you have a daughter to raise alone." "My dad has a helicopter," Ethan said, as if he were offering to share a toy. "He could take you." The innocence of the offer made Sarah's heart tighten. "Ethan, your dad barely knows me, and I spilled coffee on him, remember?" "He talks about you," Ethan revealed, going back to doodling in the sketchbook. "When he thinks I'm not paying attention. On the phone with Grandma, with Uncle Andrew, he says you're different." "Different how?" "I don't know, just different." He bit his lip, focused on a specific line. "Are you going to leave when I get out of here?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "What do you mean?" "Everyone leaves." Ethan didn't look up from his drawing, but his hand trembled slightly. "My mom left. The babysitters. My dad hires stay a few months and quit because they can't handle it. Can you handle me being annoying? The psychologists give up. You will too." Sarah felt something break inside her chest. She reached out and gently took the pencil from Ethan's hand, making him look at her. "Ethan, listen to me carefully. I'm not your babysitter. I'm not your psychologist. I'm your nurse, and someone who is starting to like you." She squeezed his small hand between hers. "And when you get discharged from here, I'll still be at the hospital doing my job. If you need to talk, if you want to show me your drawings, just come by, okay? But you won't come to my house." "Probably not," Sarah admitted. "But that doesn't mean I'm leaving your life. It just means our friendship will be different from what your dad imagined that day at the cafe." Ethan processed this for a long moment. "Okay," he finally said, going back to drawing, but now with a small smile on his lips. At that exact moment, the door opened and Richard walked in, bringing the smell of expensive coffee and that contained energy of someone who had just come from an important meeting. He stopped upon seeing Sarah there, clearly not expecting to find her on his day off. "Sarah, I didn't know you were working today." "I'm not." She stood up, grabbing her bag. "I just came to make a quick visit. I'm leaving now." "She's going to make carrot cake for me," Ethan announced, excitedly in a way that made Richard blink in surprise. "With chocolate frosting." Richard looked from Ethan to Sarah, something indefinable passing across his face. "You don't have to." "I already told your son, and I'll tell you, I know I don't have to. I want to." Sarah walked past him toward the door but stopped in the hallway. "Can I talk to you for a second?" "Outside." They walked in silence to a more private area near the nurse's lounge, away from the comings and goings of patients and doctors. Sarah crossed her arms, looking directly at Richard. "Your son thinks everyone abandons him." Richard sighed heavily, leaning against the wall. "I know." "Do you really? Because he just asked me if I'm going to leave when he gets discharged." Sarah kept her voice low but firm. "Richard, he's 12 years old and already prepared for everyone in his life to disappear. Do you realize how devastating that is?" "Do you think I don't know?" His voice came out louder than he intended, and he took a deep breath, regaining control. "Do you think I don't see that every day? That it doesn't kill me inside knowing my son doesn't trust that I'll stay?" "Then why don't you?" Sarah shot back. "Ethan told me you spend half an hour here a day, sometimes less. Where are you the rest of the time?" Working. Richard ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. Trying to keep a business running, trying to ensure we have financial stability, buying time that you'll never get back, Sarah finished. Richard, your son doesn't need financial stability. He needs you, present, here. Even if you don't know what to say, even if it's uncomfortable. It's easy for you to say, Richard snapped, and there was anger in his voice now. You're good at this. You know how to talk to him, how to make him smile. I'm a disaster. Every time I walk into that room, I see my son looking at me like I'm a stranger. And whose fault is that? The words came out harsher than Sarah intended, but she didn't take them back. You spent 3 years buried in work while Ethan drowned in anxiety. Now you want to fix everything in 2 weeks by hiring someone to do the dirty work for you. The silence that followed was tense, charged. Richard looked at Sarah with a mix of anger and pain that she recognized. It was the look of someone who knew they were hearing the truth, but didn't want to admit it. You don't know anything about me, he said, quietly, dangerously calm. You don't know what I've been through, what I'm still going through. You're right, Sarah agreed, softening her tone. I don't know, but I know what I see. A brilliant and sensitive boy who is starving for his father's attention, and a wealthy man who thinks he can outsource fatherhood. Richard remained silent for a long moment, his jaw tense. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. When Christina left, she left a note. Do you know what it said? He didn't wait for Sarah to answer. You only know how to work. You don't know how to be a husband. You don't know how to be a father. You're not here even when you're here. And she was right. I don't know how to do anything but work. It's the only thing I've learned, the only thing I'm good at. Sarah felt the anger dissolve, replaced by something more complicated, empathy mixed with frustration. Then learn, she said simply. Ethan is here, in this hospital, for a few more days. You have this window of time. Bring work if you need to, but stay in the room with him. You don't have to talk all the time, just be present. Watch him draw. Ask about the mangas he likes. Learn who your son is. Richard looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw real vulnerability there. Not the powerful executive, but just a scared man who didn't know how to fix what was broken. Will you help me? The question came out low, almost embarrassed. Not as a hired babysitter, just show me how to talk to him? Sarah hesitated. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to say no, to keep her distance, not to get involved more than she already was. But then she thought of Ethan, that shy smile when she promised she wouldn't leave. I'll make the cake, she finally said, and I'll bring it tomorrow during my shift. You come at 5 in the afternoon, as you always do. But this time, stay until 8. Hours. No phone, no laptop, no meetings, just you and Ethan. I'll stay in the room too if that helps. Why? Richard asked, genuinely confused. Why are you doing this? After how I treated you, you could just... Because I was Ethan, Sarah interrupted, her voice soft but firm. My dad left before I was born. I grew up watching my mom work 3 jobs to raise me. And even then, even exhausted, even broken, she was there. Every night, reading stories, helping with homework, just present. Ethan deserves that too. Richard nodded slowly, clearing his throat to disguise his emotion. At 5 then, I'll be there. And Richard? Sarah called as he began to walk away. Bring a notebook. You'll need to write down the names of the mangas he likes. It's a bunch of complicated Japanese names. For the first time since they met, Richard gave a genuine smile. Small, crooked, but real. Okay. As Sarah took the elevator down to leave the hospital, she pulled out her phone and sent a message to Mrs. Celine. I'm picking up Lily now, but I need to stop at the store first. Can you keep her for another half hour? The reply came quickly. "Of course, dear. Is everything okay?" Sarah looked out the elevator window as she descended, seeing New York stretch in all directions, chaotic, immense, relentless. "Yes," she typed back. "I'm making a cake." The chocolate cake arrived at the hospital in an old, slightly dented Tupperware that Sarah carefully carried while pushing the door to room 412 with her hip. It was 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, and she had made a point to arrive earlier than agreed with Richard. "I brought it," she announced, lifting the container like a trophy. Ethan dropped the video game controller, a concession Richard had made by bringing the boy's Nintendo Switch to the hospital, and his eyes lit up in a way Sarah had never seen before. "Is it true? You really made it? A promise is a promise." Sarah placed the Tupperware on the bedside table, opening it carefully. The sweet smell of homemade cake filled the room, mixing with the antiseptic odor of the hospital in a strangely comforting way. "My daughter Lily helped with the frosting. She's 9 and thinks she's a professional baker." "You have a daughter," Ethan approached, looking at the cake with reverence. "Is she cool?" "Depends on the day," Sarah joked, cutting a generous slice. "Sometimes she's an angel, sometimes she's a hurricane, but she's mine, so I'm biased." Ethan took the slice with both hands, biting carefully. Sarah watched his expression change. His eyes closed, his shoulders relaxed, and when he opened his eyes again, there were tears there. "Is it bad?" she asked, concerned. "No." His voice came out choked. "It's just like what my mom used to make. The taste, it's exactly the same." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. She had just followed a basic recipe from the internet, nothing special. But for Ethan, that cake was a bridge to a memory he had probably been trying to bury for a long time. "Come here," she said softly, opening her arms. Ethan hesitated for just a second before throwing himself into her embrace, still holding the slice of cake with one hand while the other clung to Sarah's uniform. She felt his tears soak her shoulder and just held him, letting him cry without hurry, without judgment. "She made it every Saturday," Ethan sobbed against her shoulder. "We ate while watching cartoons. It was our tradition. And after she left, I asked all the housekeepers to make it, but it never turned out the same. So I stopped asking." "You know what I think?" Sarah said quietly, still holding him. "I think your mom taught my hand to make it the right way just for today, to remind you that good things can still happen, even when we think we've lost everything." Ethan let out a wet laugh, pulling away and wiping his face with the back of his hand. "That was kind of cheesy." "It was," Sarah admitted with a smile, "but sometimes we need a cheesy line. Now finish that slice before I eat it all." At 5 o'clock sharp, as promised, Richard arrived. But this time it was different. He brought not only the executive folder, but also a bag from a bookstore and a determined expression of someone about to do something scary. "Hi," he said, the formality sounding strange after weeks of quick visits and fragmented conversations. "Hi, Dad." Ethan was back in bed, with the sketchbook on his lap and crumbs of cake still at the corners of his lips. Richard looked at Sarah, who made a discreet gesture pointing to the chair next to the bed. He nodded, sitting down and placing the bookstore bag on the floor. "So," Richard began, clearly unsure how to proceed. "How was your day?" "Normal," Ethan replied, not taking his eyes off the drawing. "I took my medicine, ate the cake Sarah made, drew a little." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Richard looked at Sarah as if asking for help, but she just raised an eyebrow, silently reminding him of the agreement. 3 hours, no distractions, present. "Was the cake good?" Richard tried again. "It was perfect." Now Ethan looked up, and there was something challenging in his gaze. "Just like Mum's. Do you remember how she made it?" The question caught Richard off guard. Sarah saw him swallow hard, his fingers gripping the arms of the chair. "I remember," he finally said, his voice hoarse. Every Saturday morning, the whole house smelled like chocolate cake. You'd be in the kitchen with her, making a mess with the frosting. "You never stayed," Ethan said, returning to his drawing. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "You were always working." Richard closed his eyes for a second, and Sarah saw the pain cross his face. She was about to intervene to soften the conversation, but then she remembered. Ethan needed to say these things, and Richard needed to hear them. "You're right," Richard said, surprising both Sarah and Ethan. "I was always working. I thought it was important, that I needed to build the company, secure our future. But what I was really doing was hiding." "Hiding from what?" Ethan stopped drawing, looking at his father. "From having to be present, from having to be vulnerable, from having to admit that I didn't know how to be a good father." Richard took a deep breath, the words coming easier now, as if a dam had burst. "Your grandfather was like that with me too. Work, work, work. I grew up thinking being a man was about that, working hard, making money, providing. No one taught me that a father also needs to be in the kitchen making a cake, you know?" Ethan fell silent, processing. Sarah was still in the chair beside him, almost holding her breath to not break the moment. "Mom left because you weren't around," Ethan said, not as a question, but as a conclusion he had reached long ago. "No," Richard replied firmly, leaning forward. "Ethan, listen to me. Your mum left because she had her own demons to face. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes people need to leave to find themselves. But that doesn't mean she didn't love you, and it definitely doesn't mean I'm going anywhere." "How can I know?" Ethan's voice trembled. "How do I know you won't wake up one day and decide it's easier without me?" Richard stood up from the armchair and sat on the edge of the bed, something Sarah had never seen him do before. He took Ethan's hands in his, large, calloused from typing, trembling slightly. "Because I'm here, because I'm going to keep being here. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but present." He squeezed his son's hands. "And you know why else? Because that woman over there," he nodded towards Sarah, "threw coffee in my face and made me wake up, made me realize I was losing you. And I'm not going to let that happen." Ethan looked at Sarah, who discreetly wiped a tear from her own face. "She really is fierce," he said with a ghost of a smile. "She is," Richard agreed, smiling too. "But sometimes we need someone fierce to shake us up. Are you guys going to date?" The question came out innocent, curious, and made both Richard and Sarah choke. "Ethan!" Sarah exclaimed, feeling her face heat up. "What? You guys look at each other kind of weird. And Dad acts different when you're in the room. Less stiff." Richard blushed, something Sarah never imagined was possible, and ran a hand through his hair, embarrassed. "Ethan, adults don't work that fast." "Why not?" Ethan asked with that simple logic of children. "If you like each other, what's the problem?" Sarah decided to intervene before the situation became more awkward. "Ethan, your dad and I barely know each other. Besides, we have very different lives. I live in Queens in a tiny apartment, work 70 hours a week, and have a daughter to raise. Your dad lives in, where do you live again?" "The Gardens," Richard replied automatically. "Triplex penthouse." "See? Different," Sarah emphasized, but something in Richard's gaze made her look away. "Different doesn't mean impossible," Ethan murmured, returning to his drawing, but there was a small, satisfied smile on his lips. The rest of the afternoon passed surprisingly peacefully. Richard grabbed the bookstore bag and pulled out 3 volumes of manga, titles he had noted while listening to Ethan's conversations with the nurses during visits. "I thought you might like these," he offered, uncertain. Ethan's eyes widened at the sight of the volumes. "Dad, I've been looking for this one for months. How did you find it?" "I asked the owner of the specialty bookstore on Fifth Avenue. He had it shipped from Japan." Ethan threw himself into his father's arms, knocking the mangas over in the process, and Richard seemed unsure of what to do for a second before returning the hug, squeezing his son tightly against his chest. Sarah took the opportunity to quietly slip out of the room, giving them privacy. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and let out a long sigh. Lisa, her shift colleague, passed by pushing a cart of medications and stopped upon seeing Sarah's expression. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Sarah replied, but it didn't sound convincing. "Just complicated." "The billionaire?" Lisa asked with a mischievous smile. "Girl, half the hospital is talking about you too. They say he can't take his eyes off you when he thinks no one is watching." "Lisa, stop it. It's not like that." "Of course not," Lisa agreed with obvious sarcasm. "That's why you made cake for his son on your day off. Totally professional." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but found no arguments, because Lisa was right. She had crossed a line at some point in the last 2 weeks, and now she didn't know how to go back. When she returned to the room half an hour later, she found Richard and Ethan sitting side by side on the bed, reading manga together. Richard clearly didn't understand anything he was seeing, but he pretended to be interested as Ethan excitedly explained the characters and the story. It was such a simple scene, so ordinary, but at the same time so rare for those two that Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. She thought of Lily, of all the nights they read stories together in the tiny bed of their queen's apartment, and wished Ethan could have that every day. "Sarah," Ethan called when he noticed her presence. "Come see, my dad is trying to understand manga." "I'm failing miserably," Richard admitted with a crooked smile. "I don't understand why I read from back to front." "Because it's Japanese, Dad. I've explained it 3 times already." Sarah sat in the chair beside them, watching the interaction with a smile. The 3 hours that had been required passed without any of them noticing. As the clock struck 8 in the evening, it was Ethan who protested. "Already? But Dad just got here." Richard looked at the clock, genuinely surprised. "Wow, I didn't realize time had passed." "That's good," Sarah said softly. "It means you were really present." When Richard finally stood up to leave, Ethan held him by the hand. "Dad, are you coming back tomorrow? Early?" "I will," Richard promised, "and I'll bring more volumes if you want." "I want, but you don't need to bring anything, just come." Sarah saw something break and rebuild on Richard's face at that moment. He kissed Ethan's forehead, another gesture she had never seen before, and murmured something too quiet for her to hear. In the hallway, he waited for Sarah. When she came out of the room after giving Ethan his nighttime medications, she found him leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. "Thank you," he said as she approached. "I don't know how you did it, but thank you." "I didn't do anything. You needed to take the first step. I just nudged." "A pretty strong nudge," Richard commented, with a half-smile. "Like throwing coffee in my face strong." Sarah laughed despite herself. "You deserved it." "I really did." He fell silent for a moment, studying her. "Can I ask you something? And you can be completely honest." "Depends on the question." Ethan asked if we're going to date. Richard kept his gaze fixed on her, and I was wondering, would that be so absurd? Sarah's heart skipped a strange beat. "Richard, I'm not asking for anything," he hurried to say. "Just trying to understand, because there's something here." He gestured between them. "And I don't know if I'm imagining it or if you feel it too." Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You hired me, or tried to hire me, 2 weeks ago. We met because I threw coffee on you. And yes, there's something here, but it might just be gratitude. You're grateful because I'm helping Ethan. I don't know, confused." "Confused works for me," Richard said softly, "because I'm confused too. But for the first time in 3 years, I'm feeling something beyond despair and guilt. And I don't know if it's because Ethan is getting better or because of you, but I think it's both." Sarah looked at this man, this powerful billionaire who suddenly seemed as lost as she was, and knew she was in trouble. Because against all logic, against all reason, she was feeling something too. "Let's take it slow," she finally said. "Ethan needs to get better first. We can't complicate things right now." "Slow is fine," Richard agreed. "I can work with slow." When Sarah finally took the subway back to Queens that night, it was already past 10. Lily was sleeping on Mrs. Celia's sofa, and Sarah carefully carried her back to their apartment, laying her down in the bed they shared. "Mom?" Lily murmured, half asleep. "Did the cake turn out good?" "It turned out perfect, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Now, sleep." But while Lily softly snored beside her, Sarah lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of the apartment, thinking about intense brown eyes and crooked smiles, about boys who needed present parents and parents who were learning to be present, and how her organized and controlled life was quickly becoming something much more complicated. April arrived, bringing the first heavy rains of the New York autumn, turning the city streets into muddy rivers and traffic into an even worse hell than usual. Ethan was discharged from the hospital in the first week of the month, with medical recommendations to continue psychological follow-up, and surprisingly, an unusual suggestion from Dr. Smith, the psychiatrist treating him, to maintain regular contact with Sarah. "She established a connection with the patient that I rarely see in clinical contexts," the doctor had explained to Richard privately. "I'm not suggesting anything unethical, but perhaps occasional visits as a family friend could help with the transition back home." That's how Sarah found herself, on a rainy Saturday in April, ringing the bell of a luxurious building on the Upper East Side for the first time in her life. Lily was by her side, gripping her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide at the uniformed doorman and the marble lobby that seemed larger than their entire apartment. "Mom, there's a fountain inside the house," Lily whispered, amazed, pointing to the water installation in the center of the lobby. "It's not a house, sweetheart. It's the building's lobby," Sarah corrected, but she was equally impressed. The place smelled of new money, fresh flowers in elaborate arrangements, central air conditioning, floors so shiny they reflected the lights of the crystal chandelier. "Ms. Miller?" The doorman approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Allen has already authorized your ascent. Penthouse, top floor. The service elevator is this way." In the mirrored elevator, Sarah adjusted her hair for the third time and smoothed her jeans that suddenly seemed too old, too faded. Lily wore her best dress, a pink floral design that Sarah had sewn by hand, but even so, it seemed simple compared to the luxury around them. "You're nervous," Lily observed with that uncanny perception children have. It's different from what we're used to, that's all." "Why are we even here?" Sarah had asked herself the same question about 50 times since she accepted Richard's invitation. Officially, it was for Ethan to meet Lily, for the kids to spend the afternoon together as Dr. Smith suggested. Unofficially, well, Sarah was trying not to think too much about that. The penthouse door opened before they could even ring the bell. Ethan was there wearing a comic book t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still damp from a shower. He smiled upon seeing Sarah, that smile she had learned to cherish because it was so rare. "You came." "I said I would," Sarah replied, entering. And then he stopped completely. The penthouse was something out of an architecture magazine. Double-height ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York, even in the rain. A spiral staircase leading to the upper floor. Modern furniture in shades of grey and white, original artwork on the walls, an integrated kitchen that looked like it had never been truly used. "It's big," Lily commented, which was the understatement of the year. Richard came down the stairs at that moment, wearing jeans and a light blue button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the first time Sarah had seen him without a suit. He looked younger this way, more approachable, although still absurdly out of place in her reality. "Sarah, Lily, welcome." He approached, extending his hand to Lily with a genuine smile. "You must be the baker responsible for the cake. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about it." Lily blushed, shaking his hand shyly. "I just helped a little." "Ethan," Richard called his son, "why don't you show Lily your room? I have those new comic books you wanted to share." The kids went up the stairs together, Lily looking around with wide eyes, Ethan chattering excitedly about his comic book collection. When their voices faded upstairs, Richard turned to Sarah. "Coffee? Or something stronger? I have a feeling you're going to need it." "Coffee is great," Sarah replied, following him to the kitchen. She watched as he prepared the drink on an expensive Italian machine, his movements surprisingly competent. "You know how to make coffee?" "I learned," he said simply. "After all the housekeepers left, I had to learn the basics. Coffee, scrambled eggs, instant noodles. My culinary repertoire is limited but functional. You let the housekeepers go." Richard handed her a fine porcelain cup, probably more expensive than all of Sarah's dishes combined. "After that afternoon at the hospital, I realized Ethan was right. Too many people coming in and out of our lives, so now it's just me and him. We have a housekeeper who comes twice a week, but the rest we do ourselves, or we try." Sarah took a sip of the coffee, absurdly good, and looked out the window at the city below. The rain drummed against the glass, creating patterns that flowed like tears. "How is he?" "Really?" "Better," Richard admitted, leaning against the marble countertop. "He went back to school this week. He still has anxiety, still has tough days, but he's better. He's eating right, sleeping, smiling sometimes." He paused, looking at her intensely. "Because of you." "Because of you," Sarah corrected. "You're present now. That makes a difference." "We're both right." Richard took a sip of his own coffee. "You showed me how. I'm doing it. But he still asks about you every day." Before Sarah could respond, a sharp laugh echoed from upstairs. Lily, laughing at something Ethan had said. The sound made them both smile. "They're getting along," Richard observed. "Lily is social. She makes friends with everyone." Sarah hesitated, choosing her words. "Ethan, is he used to other kids?" "Not much," Richard admitted with a sigh. "At school he's quiet, spends most of his time alone. He doesn't have real friends. Christina always said he was like me, more comfortable with adults than with kids his age." "That's not true," Sarah said firmly. "Look at him now, talking to Lily. He just needed someone to treat him like a normal kid, not like fragile porcelain about to break." Richard fell silent for a moment, then set his cup on the counter and looked at Sarah with that intensity that always made her feel exposed. "I have a proposal, and before you throw coffee at me again, let me finish." Sarah crossed her arms, defensive. "I'm listening. Every Saturday I take Ethan somewhere, parks, museums, whatever, but he gets more excited when he knows there will be other kids along. So I thought—" He paused, gauging her reaction. "If you and Lily wanted to join us on these outings, not as work, not as charity, just as friends." Sarah bit her lip, considering. Every logical fiber of her being screamed that it was a bad idea, that she was getting too involved, that the distance between her world and his would eventually cause problems. But then she thought of Lily upstairs, laughing, having the childhood she deserved. She thought of Ethan, finally seeming like a 12-year-old kid instead of a broken miniature adult. "Just on Saturdays," she finally said, "and we take turns choosing the places. I don't want to just go to fancy restaurants and luxury shopping. I want Ethan to really know the city. A slow smile spread across Richard's face. Deal. The first Saturday, Sarah took everyone to Central Park. It was a clear late April morning, the fresh air announcing the approaching winter. They rented bicycles, a completely new experience for Ethan, who had never ridden a regular bike, only on the stationary bike at the private gym he attended. "You have to balance," Lily yelled, laughing as Ethan wobbled, with Richard running behind holding the back of the bike like every dad does. "I'm trying," Ethan shouted back, fierce concentration on his face. Sarah pedaled alongside Lily, watching Richard and Ethan a few meters ahead. Seeing that man, always so controlled, always so composed, awkwardly running behind his son's bike, laughing when they both almost fell into a bush, was humanizing. "Mum," Lily said softly, slowing down to ride next to Sarah, "do you like Uncle Richard?" The direct question caught Sarah off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because you look at him when you think no one is watching," Lily replied with that brutal honesty of children. "And he looks at you too. It's like in the movies we watch. Watch. Lily, that's not how it works in real life." "Why not?" "Because," Sarah searched for words a 9-year-old could understand. "Because he lives in a very different world than ours. He has a lot of money, a lot of responsibilities, and we have our life, our apartment, our things." "But we could have his things too," Lily reasoned with relentless child logic. "And he could have ours. People can share." Before Sarah could respond, Ethan rode past them on his bike, hands off the handlebars, shouting with joy, "I'm doing it! I'm doing it!" Richard stopped next, to Sarah, breathless, with a smile on his face that she had never seen before, pure, genuine, weightless. "He did it," Richard said, amazed. "I didn't even notice when I let go, and he kept going." "Sometimes we need to let go for them to learn to fly," Sarah replied, watching Ethan make awkward circles ahead, with Lily pedaling alongside him, shouting instructions. Richard looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes. "You always know the right thing to say." "Not always." Sarah looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity. "Most of the time I'm just improvising." They rode through the park for another 2 hours, eventually stopping for coconut water from a vendor. Ethan grimaced as he drank, clearly not used to it, while Lily laughed at him. "It's delicious," she insisted. "You have to drink it fast." "It tastes like grass," Ethan complained, but finished it anyway, competitive. Sitting on the grass under the shade of a yellow tree, the kids eventually wandered off to watch a group of people flying kites. Sarah and Richard sat in comfortable silence, observing. "Thank you for this," Richard said after a while. "I never thought of bringing Ethan to a public park. I always thought we needed controlled places, safe, private." "Sometimes the best places are the simplest," Sarah replied. "Where real life happens. Where he can just be another kid, not the billionaire's son." "You have a lot of prejudice against money," Richard observed, but it didn't sound accusatory, just curious. "Not against money," Sarah corrected. "Against what money makes people think they can have or control. You tried to buy me, remember?" "I'll never forget," Richard admitted with a crooked smile. "That coffee stain on my favorite tie reminds me every time I see it." "You kept the tie?" "I did." He looked at her, serious now. "As a reminder of the day someone was finally honest with me. The day someone treated me like a person, not an ATM." Sarah felt her heart race in an inconvenient way. "Richard." "I know," he gently interrupted. "Slowly, I remember, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate these moments. These Saturdays. You two in my life, in Ethan's life." Before Sarah could respond, Lily came running, dragging Ethan by the hand. "Mom! Uncle Richard! There's a man making giant bubbles. Let's go see." They spent the rest of the afternoon following the kids around the park, eating pastries. Ethan ate 3, to Richard's surprise. taking pictures in front of the lake, watching Ethan and Lily feed the ducks with leftover bread from their snack. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Richard offered a ride to Sarah and Lily. In the quiet Mercedes, with the kids excitedly chatting in the back seat about which park they would visit next Saturday, Sarah looked out the window and tried not to think about how easy that day had been, dangerously easy. When they arrived in front of Sarah's building in Queens, a stark contrast to the luxurious building in the Upper East Side, Richard looked around with genuine curiosity, not judgment. "Is this where you live?" "Apartment 304, Sarah confirmed, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Thanks for the ride." "Sarah," Richard called as she was getting out, "next Saturday, you choose the place." Sarah looked at Lily and Ethan in the back seat, already making plans, already building a friendship she wasn't sure how to protect when everything inevitably got complicated. "Brooklyn Flea Market," she finally said. 8 in the morning, if you can wake up early." "I will," Richard promised with a smile, and as Sarah and Lily climbed the stairs, the elevator was broken again, to their small apartment with a leaking ceiling and a dripping faucet, Sarah realized she was smiling. Dangerously, inconveniently smiling. "He's nice, isn't he, Mom?" Lily said, skipping 2 steps at a time. "He is," Sarah admitted, because there was no point in lying. "He is." Saturdays became sacred. Throughout May and June, as the New York winter settled in with its chilly mornings and surprisingly warm afternoons, the 4 established a routine that none of them had planned but all secretly desired. Sarah chose the Brooklyn Flea Market as promised. Richard arrived exactly at 8 in the morning on a cold Saturday in May, wearing a simple sweatshirt for the first time in his life instead of designer clothes. Ethan was excited, Lily even more so, and Sarah had to admit that seeing that powerful man haggling with vendors over old vinyl records had an unexpected charm. $50 is way too much for a scratched LP, Richard argued with Mrs. Johnson, a 70-year-old lady who had been selling antiques at her stall for 3 decades. "Oh, really?" she shot back, amused. "Then go buy it at the mall for $300. Go on, 50 is a friend price." Sarah watched Richard retreat, defeated, paying the $50 with a sideways smile. Ethan held an old vintage action figure he had found, his eyes shining. "My dad never haggled before," he murmured to Sarah as they walked between the stalls. "He just bought things at the price they asked." "Haggling is part of the experience," Sarah explained. "It's like a game. Everyone knows the first price is never the real price. This isn't a bit dishonest?" "It's negotiation," Lily corrected her new friend with the wisdom of someone who had accompanied her mother to flea markets since childhood. "Just like when my mum negotiates prices with the market owner, everyone wins in the end." Richard joined them at that moment, carrying not only the scratched vinyl record, but also an old Polaroid camera that he clearly didn't need but bought anyway. He seemed lighter, different from the tense executive that Sarah had met at the cafe months ago. "I found this," he showed the camera to the kids. The seller said, "It still works. I thought we could take some photos today." They spent the entire morning at the flea market. Ethan and Lily posed for hazy and imperfect Polaroids that were infinitely more valuable than any digital photo. They ate street food pastries while sitting on old wooden benches, sticky with sugarcane juice, and sampled artisanal cheeses brought by a local farmer. "This is so good," Ethan declared, biting into a piece of aged cheddar. "Why don't we ever buy this at home?" "Because I used to buy everything from that luxury supermarket that delivers," Richard admitted. "I never thought about just coming to places like this." "The real world," Sarah said softly, "where real people live real lives." "I like it better here," Ethan announced, looking around the market, vendors shouting deals, the smell of food mixed with incense from the craft stalls, live music, playing some classic samba in the background. Richard picked up the Polaroid and took a picture of Ethan smiling, sugar-cane juice in hand, completely present in the moment. As the photo slowly developed, he stared at it for a long time. "I had forgotten how he is when he's happy," Richard said so, quietly, that Sarah almost didn't hear. Truly happy. The following week, Ethan had an anxiety attack at school. Not as severe as before, but enough for the counselor to call Richard in the middle of an important meeting. He dropped everything, for the first time since he founded the company, and went to pick him up. On the following Thursday, Sarah received an unexpected call at the hospital. It was Richard. "Sorry to call you at work," he began, sounding exhausted, "but Ethan is asking for you. His episode. He doesn't want to talk to the psychologist. He doesn't want to talk to me. He just keeps repeating your name." Sarah looked around the busy ward. She was in the middle of her shift, had 10 patients under her care, and couldn't just leave. But then she thought of Ethan, that fragile boy who had learned to smile again. "Give me an hour," she said. "I'll figure it out." Lisa covered for her. "Go, help your billionaire." And Sarah took an Uber she couldn't afford to the Upper East Side. When she arrived at the penthouse, she found Ethan curled up on the giant sofa in the living room, hugging one of the comic books Richard had bought, trembling. "Hey, champ," Sarah said softly, sitting down beside him. Richard was standing near the window, hands in his pockets, helpless. "I couldn't breathe," Ethan murmured against the comic book. "At school, everyone was staring. I'm weird. Everyone knows I'm weird." "You're not weird," Sarah said firmly. "You have anxiety. It's different. A lot of people have anxiety, Ethan. Adults, kids, all kinds of people. My dad doesn't." Sarah looked at Richard, who averted his gaze. "Your dad has it too," she said, surprising them both. "He just learned to hide it very well. He learned that men can't show weakness, can't tremble, can't be afraid, but that doesn't mean he doesn't feel it. Is that true?" Ethan lifted his head to look at his dad. Richard was silent for a long moment, the internal struggle clear on his face. Then, slowly, he walked over to the sofa and sat down across from Ethan. "It's true," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Every time you have an episode, my heart races so much that I think I'm going to have a heart attack. When I'm in important meetings, sometimes my hands shake so much that I have to sit on them. I wake up in the middle of the night with my mind racing, thinking about everything that could go wrong. And when your mom left..." He paused, swallowing hard. "When your mom left, I had panic attacks alone in the office bathroom." Ethan looked at his dad with wide eyes. "Really? Really? But I was 39 and had learned my whole life that showing this was weakness. So I hid it, worked harder, controlled more, suppressed more." Richard took his son's hand. "You're 12, and you're already learning to ask for help. That's not weakness, Ethan. It's courage. You're braver than I am." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. She placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You know what we're going to do? We're going to breathe together, the three of us. A technique I learned in nursing school." She guided them through breathing exercises, counting slowly, holding both their hands. Richard awkwardly followed at first, but gradually found the rhythm. Ethan gradually stopped trembling. "Better?" Sarah asked after 10 minutes. Ethan nodded. Can you stay a little longer?" "I can stay until you fall asleep, if you need." She stayed. 3 hours. That cost half her salary in Uber and a scolding from her supervisor, but she stayed, watched silly comedy movies with Ethan until he finally fell asleep on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, breathing peacefully. Richard carefully covered his son and gestured for Sarah to follow him to the kitchen. "How much do I owe you for the Uber?" he asked, already reaching for his wallet. "Nothing," Sarah replied firmly. "I didn't come here as a worker. I came as a friend." "Sarah, I know how much an Uber from Queens to here costs, and I know you can't." "Can't what?" she cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. "Can't pay, can't afford it. You're right, I can't. But there are things that I do it because I want to, not because I can afford them." Richard slowly closed his wallet. "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend." "I know," Sarah sighed, rubbing her face with her hands. "I'm sorry too. It's hard sometimes. You solve everything with money because you can. I don't have that option, so I make do." "Teach me," Richard said suddenly. "What?" "Teach me how to solve things without money. Because clearly I don't know how to do that." He leaned against the counter, vulnerable in a way that still surprised her. "When Ethan had his crisis today, my first instinct was to call private doctors, offer to pay whatever it took. But what he needed was you. Your presence, someone who truly cares, not someone paid to care." "Richard," Sarah began, but he continued. "And I know I'm falling for you," he said, the words coming out fast, almost desperately. "I know it doesn't make sense, that we're from different worlds, that we've only known each other for a few months. But when you're around, everything becomes clearer." Ethan smiles more. "I breathe better. And I don't want it to be because of money or convenience or because you feel sorry for us. I want it to be real." Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Part of her wanted to run. It was too fast, too complicated, too risky. But another part, the part she had been trying to ignore for weeks, wanted to stay. "I'm feeling something too," she finally admitted, the words costing more than they should. "But, Richard, I'm really scared. Scared that this is just circumstance. Ethan getting better, you being grateful, me being useful. And when everything normalizes, when you don't need me anymore, what's left?" "Me," Richard said simply. "You, us, if we let it exist. And Lily, Ethan. We can't be selfish about this. They're getting attached to each other, to this routine. If it goes wrong between us, then we make it work." Richard interrupted. "Look, I'm not good at relationships. My marriage proves that, but for the first time in years, I want to try. I want to learn with you." Sarah looked at this man, so powerful in his professional life, so lost in his personal life, and made a decision she knew could break her heart later. "Slowly," she said. "Very slowly. For the kids. For us." "Slowly," Richard agreed, but there was a smile on his lips. "Can I at least kiss you? Or is that too fast?" Sarah felt her face flush. "Richard. Sorry, that was inappropriate. She kissed him. It was she who closed the distance between them, who placed her hands on his face, who pressed her lips against his in a kiss that started hesitantly and deepened quickly. Richard pulled her close, his hands on her waist, and for a moment the whole world disappeared. No class differences, no complications, no fears. Just the two of them in the absurdly luxurious kitchen, allowing themselves to feel. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. Sarah rested her forehead against his, eyes closed. "That was fast," Richard finished with a smile in his voice, "but worth every second." "I have to go," Sarah said, but she didn't pull away immediately. "I need to pick up Lily from Mrs. Thompson's house." "Let me call my driver." "Richard," she gently interrupted him. "Uber, I'm taking an Uber, okay?" He nodded, clearly struggling not to insist. "Okay, but next Saturday? Shall we keep it?" "We will," Sarah confirmed. "But we need to talk to the kids. Explain that we might be becoming something more than friends. They deserve to know." "I agree." Richard walked her to the door. "Sarah, thank you. For coming, for staying, for everything." She smiled, touching his face one last time before leaving. See you on Saturday. In the Uber back, Sarah rested her head against the cold glass of the window and let reality return. She had just kissed Richard Allen. She had admitted she felt something. She had crossed a line she wasn't sure how to navigate. Her phone vibrated. A message from Richard. "Thank you for being in my life." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Thank you for letting me in." When she got home and found Lily sleeping on Mrs. Thompson's sofa, she picked her daughter up, even though she was already too heavy for that, and carried her to the apartment. She laid her down on the bed they shared and watched her for a long moment. "What have I done, my love?" she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "What have I gotten myself into?" But even as she asked, Sarah knew there was no turning back. She had fallen in love with the complicated man, with the fragile boy, with the possibility of something that scared her as much as it enchanted her. There, in the Upper East Side, Richard watched his son sleeping on the sofa and allowed himself, for the first time in years, to have hope. Hope that family could be rebuilt, that love could exist even after so much had been broken, that maybe, just maybe, they could be happy. The following Saturday dawned with a timid sun at the end of June, one of those rare winter days in New York, where the cold gives way to an almost pleasant afternoon. Richard arrived in Queens for the first time, driving himself. No driver, no ostentation. The black Mercedes seemed out of place on the narrow street, parked between an old Volkswagen and a motorcycle with a broken fairing. Sarah was waiting for him on the sidewalk, Lily by, her side bouncing with excitement. Ethan got out of the car with his sketchbook under his arm and the first genuine smile he had given all day. "Where are we going today?" Lily asked, already taking Ethan's hand, as if they had been siblings for years. "Art Museum," Sarah announced. "There's a new exhibition of artists I thought Ethan would like." He raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You did your research?" "I did," she admitted, blushing slightly. "I thought that since he likes to draw, seeing real art could inspire him." The museum was moderately busy for a Saturday. Families, art, students and tourists wandered through the high-ceilinged halls filled with natural light streaming in from skylights. Ethan stopped in front of each painting, studying with that intensity that Richard was learning to recognize, not anxiety, but pure focus. "Look at how he did the shadows here," Ethan murmured, practically pressing his nose against a Picasso canvas. "It's just paint, but it looks real. How did he do that?" Richard looked at Sarah, lost. He didn't understand anything about art beyond buying expensive pieces for decoration, but Sarah smiled, moving closer to Ethan. "It's technique," she explained, "layer upon layer of paint. Each one adding depth, kind of like when you draw your comic books. You don't do it all at once, right? You build it up." "Exactly!" Ethan turned, excited. "It's just like that." They spent 2 hours in the museum. Lily got bored after half an hour, and Sarah ended up taking her to the cafe, while Richard stayed with Ethan in the galleries. It was the first time father and son had been alone since they started their Saturday quartet, and Sarah felt her heart tighten with anxiety as she left them. "They'll be fine," Lily said with the disconcerting wisdom she sometimes displayed. "Uncle Richard is learning to talk to Ethan. You can tell." In the cafe, while Lily devoured a piece of chocolate cake, she looked at her mother with those penetrating green eyes that missed nothing. "Did you and Uncle Richard kiss?" Sarah choked on her coffee. "What? How? Why are you asking that?" "Because you look at him differently now, and he smiles when he thinks no one is watching." Lily licked the chocolate off her fingers, casual. "It's like at school when Julia and Peter started dating. They looked at each other the same way." Sarah took a deep breath. She had planned to have this conversation, but didn't expect Lily to bring it up first. "Lily, Yes, we kissed. Once, but it's complicated." Why? Because... Sarah searched for the right words. Because Uncle Richard and I are very different. He has a lot of money, lives in a huge place, has a life that's not like ours, and I'm afraid that if we try dating and it doesn't work out, everyone will get hurt, especially you and Ethan. Lily was silent for a moment, processing. Then she asked, "But do you like him?" "Yes," Sarah admitted, because lying to her daughter had never been her practice. "I do." "And does he like you?" He said yes. "Then what's the problem?" Lily asked with that childlike logic that simplified everything. "If you like each other, you try. If it doesn't work out, at least you tried. The teacher always says it's better to try and fail than to never try and never know." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. When had her daughter become so wise? "And what if it goes wrong and you and Ethan can't be friends anymore?" "We'll still be friends," Lily said with absolute certainty. "I like Ethan. Even if you and Uncle Richard fight, I'll still like him. You two will have to deal with us wanting to see each other." Sarah laughed, despite the tears, pulling Lily into a hug. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," Lily replied, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "You just didn't notice." When they returned to the galleries, they found Richard and Ethan sitting on a bench in front of a huge Van Gogh painting, talking quietly. Ethan was drawing in his sketchbook, trying to replicate the abstract shapes, while Richard watched. "It's strange," Ethan was saying, "but it's beautiful at the same time. How can it be both?" "I think the best things are like that," Richard replied. "Strange and beautiful at the same time. Unexpected." Sarah and Lily approached silently, not wanting to break the moment. Ethan showed his drawing to Richard, a free interpretation of the artwork, with elements of comic book style mixed with modernism. "This is amazing," Richard said, and for the first time he sounded completely genuine, without the formality he usually had. "You have real talent, Ethan. We should look for professional classes for you." "Really?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Real classes with an art teacher? Why not? If this is what you love to do, we should invest in it." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Seeing Richard finally understand his son, finally paying attention to what really mattered to Ethan instead of just trying to fix symptoms, was beautiful. They had lunch at a simple restaurant near the museum, nothing fancy, just good comfort food. Ethan ordered chili and ate it all, something Richard noted with surprise. His son had always been picky, especially after the separation. "He's eating." "More," Sarah murmured to Richard while the kids debated which dessert to order. "I noticed. Sleeping better too. Fewer nightmares." Richard looked at his son with obvious affection. "Because of you. Because of all this." "It's not just because of me," Sarah gently corrected. "It's because you're present, because he finally has a real dad, not just a provider." "Does Lily know?" Richard asked quietly. "About us." "She knows. She directly asked if we kissed." Sarah smiled at the embarrassment. "She's too observant for her own good." "And what did you say?" "The truth. That yes, we like each other, but we're taking it slow." Sarah looked at him. "Does Ethan know?" "Not yet. I was waiting for the right moment." Richard hesitated. "I'm afraid of how he'll react. What if he thinks I'm replacing his mother? What if it triggers another crisis?" "Or," Sarah gently offered, "what if he's happy? Ethan isn't dumb, Richard. He notices things too." As if hearing his name, Ethan turned. In that moment, Richard asked, "Are you two dating?" The silence that followed was absolute. Lily covered her mouth to avoid laughing. Richard turned red. Sarah took a deep breath. "Why are you asking?" "That?" she inquired. "Because you keep looking at each other like in the movies, and because your dad is different, happier, and because Lily told me." He shot a glance at his friend, who shrugged without remorse. Richard cleared his throat. "Ethan, Sarah and I are trying to figure out if we can be more than friends, but that doesn't mean—" "That's cool," Ethan interrupted. Sarah and Richard blinked in surprise. "I like Sarah, and you seem less sad when she's around, so it's cool." "Are you sure?" Richard asked, clearly not believing it would be that easy. "Is it not going to make you uncomfortable or sad?" Ethan thought for a moment, serious. "It's going to be weird," he admitted. "But weird isn't always bad. Like that painting over at the art museum. Strange, but beautiful." He looked between Richard and Sarah. "You two are kind of weird together, but beautiful too." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes for the second time that day. Lily clapped discreetly. Richard seemed to have been hit by an emotional truck. "When did you get so mature?" Richard asked his son, his voice hoarse. "I've always been," Ethan replied, echoing Lily from earlier. "You just didn't notice." They spent the rest of the afternoon in Central Park, the kids running ahead while Richard and Sarah walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally but not fully touching. "So," Richard said after a comfortable silence, "officially we are trying?" "Trying," Sarah agreed, "with rules." "There's always rules with you," Richard complained without real heat. "Rule number 1, no trying to solve my problems with money. I work, pay my bills, take care of my daughter. I don't need to be saved." "I agree," Richard said quickly. "But what if I want to give you a gift? A real gift, not charity." "Depends on the gift," Sarah conceded. "But no cars, apartments, or expensive jewelry. Understood?" "Understood. Rule number 2. You're not introducing me to your family or friends until we're sure this is serious. I don't want to be the billionaire's experiment with the poor nurse." Richard stopped walking, turning to her with a serious expression. "Sarah, I would never—" "You are not an experiment, and my family will have to accept it whenever that is." "Your mom is going to hate me," Sarah said confidently. "Women like her hate women like me." "My mom will have to get over it," Richard replied firmly, "but I agree to wait. Let things solidify before introducing you to society." He grimaced. "It's going to be a circus when the media finds out." "The media?" Sarah hadn't thought about that. "What do you mean, media?" "Sarah, I'm relatively known. When I show up dating someone for the first time since the divorce, they're going to want to know who it is." Richard took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "But we'll deal with that when it comes. For now, it's just the 4 of us." That night, when Richard dropped Sarah and Lily back in Queens, he kissed her goodbye. Quick, chaste, but in front of the kids. Ethan and Lily clapped from the back seat, laughing. "You, adults kissing," Lily pretended to complain. "Totally gross," Ethan agreed, but both were smiling. That night, lying in bed next to Lily, Sarah looked at her phone. A message from Richard. "Today was perfect. Thank you for giving us a chance." She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally sending, "I'm scared, but also happy. It's a strange combination." The reply came immediately. "Strange and beautiful, like the painting. Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Richard." Lily stirred beside her, murmuring in her sleep. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead and closed her eyes, allowing herself, for the first time in years, to imagine a future that included more than just surviving. A future that perhaps, just perhaps, included happiness. But in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered warnings about class differences, about social expectations, about everything that could go wrong. Sarah ignored it for now, choosing to live in the present, in that fragile moment of possibility. Across the city, in the Upper East Side, Richard was having a similar conversation with himself. Sitting in his home office, looking out at the illuminated city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he allowed himself to have hope. Hope that even after so much brokenness, something new could be built. "Dad?" Ethan appeared in the doorway, still awake even though it was past 11. "Are you okay?" "I'm great," Richard replied, and it was true. "Can't sleep." Ethan entered the office, sitting in the armchair in front of his father's desk, just thinking about how things have changed. 6 months ago, I couldn't get out of bed. Now I'm going to museums and eating chili, and you're dating. Ethan smiled. "It's kind of surreal." "It is," Richard agreed. "But is it good?" "It's good," Ethan confirmed. Then he hesitated. "Dad, do you think Mom would be happy, knowing that you're happy?" The question caught Richard off guard. He thought of Christine, in London, living the life she needed to live. They still talked occasionally about Ethan, about practical matters. The relationship had evolved from painful to friendly, distant but friendly. "I think so," Richard said honestly. "Your mum always wanted me to be more present, more human. I think she would be happy to know that I've finally learned." "I like Sarah," Ethan said, "a lot. But sometimes I feel guilty, like, am I betraying Mom by liking someone else?" Richard stood up and walked over to his son, kneeling in front of him. "Ethan, listen to me. Liking Sarah doesn't mean you like your mom any less. The heart doesn't work that way. We don't have a limited amount of love to give. When someone new comes into our lives, the heart just expands. Understand?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Like when I met Lily. I didn't stop liking my other colleagues. I just gained another friend." "Exactly." Richard hugged his son. "And your mother will always be your mother. Nothing changes that. But Sarah can be another important person, if you let her." "I will let her," Ethan decided. I think we deserve to be happy. After everything." "We do," Richard agreed, pulling Ethan close to his chest. "We definitely do." July arrived, bringing the biting cold that New York reserves for the peak of winter. Mornings dawned with that fine, persistent drizzle that soaked everything, and nights demanded heavy blankets and closed windows. It was in this month that everything began to complicate in ways none of them had anticipated. The first crack came from where Sarah least expected, the hospital. She was in the nurse's break room during her lunch break, heating up her meal in the microwave, when Lisa and 2 other colleagues entered with that air of having fresh gossip. "Girl, did you see?" Lisa showed her phone, a celebrity gossip site open on the screen. The headline screamed, "Tech billionaire Richard Allen spotted with mysterious brunette. New love?" Sarah felt her stomach drop. The photo was from last Saturday when they went to the farmer's market. She and Richard were walking side by side, Lily and Ethan a few steps ahead. The image was slightly blurred, clearly taken from afar, but it was unmistakably them. "It's not you, is it?" Lisa asked, feigning innocence, but there was something sharp in her eyes. "The mysterious brunette." "It is," Sarah admitted, because there was no point in lying. The news would spread anyway. The silence that followed was heavy. Jessica, a nursing technician who had always been cold to Sarah, let out a dry laugh. "Of course, the saint here managed to snag a billionaire. I can only imagine how." Sarah felt her blood boil. "What are you implying?" "Nothing," Jessica said with false innocence. "I just find it interesting how you went from 'I barely have money for the bus' to dating a billionaire so quickly. You must be talented at taking care of him." "Jessica," Lisa reprimanded, but there was curiosity on her face too. Sarah grabbed her meal, appetite completely lost, and left the room without saying anything more. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to control her breathing. Her hands were shaking. She had been naive, thinking they could keep things private, simple, just for them. Her phone vibrated. "Richard, did you see the article? I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. Do you want my lawyer to contact the site?" Sarah typed and deleted 3 responses before sending, "No, it will make things worse." We'll talk later. But it got worse in other ways. In the following days, Sarah began to notice subtle changes at the hospital. Colleagues who had previously been friendly became distant. Others, on the contrary, became excessively interested in her life, asking invasive questions about Richard, about money, about what it was like dating a billionaire. The nursing supervisor called her in for a chat just to confirm that Sarah wasn't using her position at the hospital for financial gain or compromising professional ethics. Of course not, Sarah had responded, indignant. I met Richard because his son was my patient, but our relationship started after his discharge. There's nothing unethical about it. I just needed to confirm, the supervisor said, but there was judgment in her eyes. You understand that appearances matter. Sarah arrived home that night exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. Lily was at Mrs. Thompson's house. The neighbor had practically become a grandmother to the girl. Sarah took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away some of the tension, and then called Richard. I'm thinking maybe I should slow things down, she said bluntly, at least publicly. What? Why? Richard sounded genuinely alarmed. Sarah told him about the hospital, about the comments, about how suddenly her professional life was being contaminated by her personal life. Sarah, don't let these people affect you, Richard argued. They're envious, frustrated. You haven't done anything wrong. I know I haven't, Sarah replied, her voice tired. But Richard, you don't understand. For you, this attention is normal. You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You're used to the spotlight, to people talking about you. I'm not. I'm just a nurse from Queens who wanted to live my life in peace. So what are you saying? That you want to break up? There was panic in his voice now. No, Sarah said quickly. I don't want to break up. I just need time to process, to figure out how to handle all this, without losing my sanity. They talked for another hour, Richard trying to reassure her, Sarah trying to make him understand the difference between his world and hers. When they hung up, both were exhausted, and no problem had really been resolved. The second crack came from where Richard should have anticipated, his mother. Beatrice Allen was a matriarch of New York high society, 72 years of impeccable plastic surgeries, heirloom jewelry from 3 generations, and strong opinions about absolutely everything. She called Richard on a Tuesday afternoon, her tone making it clear she wasn't asking but informing him that she would be coming for dinner that night. Mom, it's not a good time. Richard Henry Allen, don't make me repeat myself. 7 o'clock. I'll be there. Richard hung up and immediately texted Sarah. My mom found out. She's coming over tonight, sorry. Sarah read the message 3 times before responding. It was only a matter of time. Stay strong. I'll call you later. Beatrice arrived promptly at 7, bringing with her that aura of disapproval she had perfected over decades. She kissed her grandson with genuine affection. Ethan was her weakness, but dismissed the housekeeper Richard, hadn't yet had the courage to fire with an imperious gesture. We need to talk, alone. Ethan looked at his father, worried, but Richard gestured for him to go upstairs. When they were alone in the enormous living room, Beatrice wasted no time. Are you serious, Richard? She didn't even sit down, preferring to stand tall in her imperial stature. I saw the picture. I read about her. Single mother, lives in Queens, works 70 hours a week because she can barely pay the bills. Mother, don't interrupt me. The tone was icy. Do you have any idea what society is saying? What the ladies at the club are whispering? Poor Richard, so desperate for company that he took the first gold digger that came along. Sarah is not a gold digger, Richard exploded, standing up. She is the proudest and most independent woman I've ever met. She constantly refuses my financial help. She pays for everything herself, even when I know it's tough. Of course she refuses at first, Beatrice said disdainfully. It's part of the game. It makes you think she's different, humble, authentic, and when you're hooked, the demands start. First small things, then a better. Apartment for the daughter, then a car, then... Enough! Richard had never shouted at his mother, but now his voice echoed off the marble walls. You don't know Sarah. You don't know anything about her other than what you've read in gossip online. She has made me a better man, a better father to Ethan. Ethan, Beatrice latched onto the name. Have you thought about Ethan? He just recovered from a severe crisis. Do you think it's healthy for him to get attached to a woman and a child who probably won't stick around when things get tough? They won't. Leave, Richard said, but there was a note of doubt in his voice that Beatrice immediately picked up on. Are you sure? She softened her tone, moving closer to her son. Richard, dear, I just want to protect you. Protect Ethan. You've already suffered with Christine. I don't want to see you hurt again by someone who isn't from our world. Sarah is from my world now, Richard said firmly, and Mother, with all due respect, my relationship is none of your business. Beatrice stiffened. Fine, be stubborn. But when she asks you to support her daughter, pay for expensive private schools, fund a lifestyle she could never have on her own. Remember this conversation. She left, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and poison. Richard was left alone in the room, his mother's words echoing in his head like seeds of doubt he didn't want to plant but were already germinating. Ethan came down half an hour later, finding his father still standing in the same spot. Was it bad? It was complicated. Richard pulled his son into a hug. Grandma doesn't approve of Sarah. Why not? Sarah is amazing. Because Grandma thinks Sarah is only with me for the money, Richard sighed, and she tried to make me doubt her too. And did you believe her? Ethan stepped back, looking at his father with eyes that seemed too old for 12 years. No, Richard said, but I can't say that doubt didn't creep into my mind even for a second. Then you're an idiot, Ethan declared bluntly. Sarah had reasons to give up on you 1,000 times. When you tried to hire her, when you were arrogant, when you didn't know how to talk to me, she stayed because she wanted to, not because she needed to. If it were about money, she would have accepted your help from the start. Richard looked at his son, surprised by the clarity of the analysis. When did you get so wise? I've always been, Ethan replied, the phrase already becoming a mantra. You adults complicate everything. That same night, Lily made a discovery that would complicate things even further. She was at a friend's house when the friend's mother, unaware of the connection, began to comment on that scandal of the billionaire with the nurse. Can you imagine, the woman was saying to other mothers while preparing dinner, not noticing Lily standing in the doorway? Him rich like that and her a poor single mother. Of course she schemed, probably seduced him on purpose. Lily returned home early, asking Mrs. Thompson to pick her up. When Sarah came home from her night shift, she found her daughter awake in bed, hugging her pillow. Sweetheart, why aren't you sleeping? Mom, Lily began, her voice tiny, are people at school going to talk about you, like Emily's mom was talking today? Sarah's heart sank. What did Emily's mom say? Lily told her, and Sarah felt the anger boil in her veins. Not at the woman who didn't know her, but at the whole situation that was exposing her daughter to this kind of thing. Lily, listen to me. Sarah sat on the bed, taking her daughter's hands. People are going to talk. They always do, especially when they don't understand something. But I need you to know the truth. I'm not with Richard for the money. I'm with him because I like him, because he makes me happy, because Ethan and you have become friends. I know that, Lily said, but other people don't, and they're going to ask me things at school. They probably will, Sarah admitted, feeling the weight of the situation. And you can tell the truth. That your mom met a nice man, that she's trying to have a relationship, and that it's nobody's business but our family's. Do you think it will work out? Lily asked, vulnerable in a way that broke Sarah's heart. With Uncle Richard? Because I don't want to lose Ethan. He's my best friend now. I don't know, sweetheart, Sarah replied honestly. Relationships are complicated, but I promise that whatever happens with us adults, we'll do everything we can to make sure you two stay friends, okay? Lily nodded, but there was worry in her eyes that shouldn't exist in a 9-year-old. That night, Sarah stayed awake for hours after Lily finally fell asleep. The phone was silent, no messages from Richard. She picked up the device 3 times to type something, but always stopped. What to say? Your mother is right, and I don't belong in your world. My daughter is suffering at school because... Sarah was lost in thought, questioning their cause. Is it worth it? But then she thought of Richard, the little gestures that revealed the man behind the billionaire. How he had learned to make coffee just the way she liked it. How he held her hand when he thought no one was watching. How he looked at Ethan with so much love, it was almost painful to witness. For the first time in years, Sarah felt seen, not as a mother, not as a nurse, not as a survivor, but simply as Sarah. Was that enough to face everything that was coming? She had no answer. So she did what she always did when life became too heavy. She got up, brewed coffee, and started getting ready for another double shift at the hospital, because no matter what happened with Richard Allen, life went on. Bills still needed to be paid, Lily still needed to be raised, and Sarah Miller still needed to be strong. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself a tear while showering. Just one, washed away by the water, along with everything else she couldn't afford to feel. On the other side of the city, Richard was also awake, staring at his phone, wanting to call Sarah, but not knowing what to say. Ethan slept in the next room, finally at peace after months of nightmares. His mother's words echoed in his head, planting doubts he hated but couldn't completely ignore. He had built an empire by learning to calculate risks. But how do you calculate the risk of loving someone? Of opening your controlled world to something as chaotic as a real relationship? What if his mother was right? What if, in the end, the difference between his world and Sarah's was insurmountable? Richard finally sent a text at 3 a.m. I'm here, always, no matter what happens. Sarah read the message at 5:30, already on the bus to the hospital. She wanted to believe those words. She wanted to believe so much. But experience had taught Sarah Miller that promises of always rarely survived reality. August arrived, bringing the final blow that nearly destroyed everything they had built. The month began with a series of seemingly disconnected events that, like dominoes falling one after another, would culminate in an explosion that tested the limits of everything Richard and Sarah meant to each other. The first piece fell on a Friday afternoon. Sarah was at the hospital when she received a call from Lily's school principal. Her heart raced immediately. Calls from school were never good news. Mrs. Miller, I need you to come pick up Lily. There's been an incident. Sarah dropped everything, asked Lisa to cover her shift again, and rushed to the school. She found Lily sitting in the principal's office, her left eye beginning to swell, dry tears on her face, arms crossed in a defensive posture. What happened? Sarah knelt in front of her daughter, examining the bruised eye with trembling hands. Lily hit another student, the principal explained, her tone stern. Amanda Smith, she punched her in the face during recess. Lily? Sarah was shocked. Her daughter had never, ever been involved in violence. Why did you do that? Because she wouldn't stop talking, Lily exploded, tears returning. She kept saying that you're a gold digger, that you're using Uncle Richard, that we're going to live in his penthouse and leave everyone behind. I told her to stop, but she wouldn't. She called you, Lily's voice broke. A slut, just like she heard her mother say. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt something break inside her, not anger at the child repeating words she had heard from adults, but anger at the whole situation, at how her attempt to find happiness was destroying her daughter's peace. "Mrs. Miller," the principal continued, uncomfortable, "I understand the provocation, but violence is not acceptable. Lily is suspended for 3 days. And, well, it might be best to consider that your personal life is affecting your daughter's school environment." Sarah felt her blood boil. "Are you suggesting I end my relationship because gossiping parents can't control their tongues in front of their kids?" "I'm not suggesting anything," the principal backed down, "just observing that Lily has been a great student. It would be a shame if all this hindered her development." Sarah left the school, holding Lily's hand so tightly that the girl complained. She only let go when they got home, locking the door behind them and finally letting the tears fall. "Mum, did I ruin everything?" Lily asked, frightened to see her mother crying. "Are you going to have to break up with Uncle Richard because of me?" "No," Sarah said, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "None of this is your fault. None. You were defending your mom, and I love you so much, so much." They cried together on the tiny sofa of the apartment, while outside the city continued indifferent to their suffering. Sarah called Richard, but the call went straight to voicemail. He must have been in a meeting. She didn't leave a message. She didn't even know where to begin explaining. The second piece fell on the same day, but Richard only found out hours later. His mother Beatrice was not satisfied with merely expressing her disapproval. She had decided to take action. Using contacts in strategic positions, she initiated a discreet investigation into Sarah Miller. The report landed on Richard's desk Monday morning, personally delivered by Beatrice. It was a 15-page document detailing every aspect of Sarah's life: old debts she had struggled to pay off, the unknown father of Lily, collection lawsuits she had faced years ago, even a credit report showing her precarious financial situation. "See?" Beatrice pointed to the numbers. "She's in debt up to her neck. She can barely pay rent. Do you still think she's not interested in your money?" Richard held the report with trembling hands, not from validation, but from pure anger. "Did you investigate her? Violated her privacy? Mom, what the hell were you thinking?" "I was protecting you," Beatrice shot back, equally furious. "Someone needs to have common sense in this family. You're so blinded by this woman that you can't see the obvious." "The obvious?" Richard threw the report on the table. "The obvious is that Sarah works 3 shifts a week to support her daughter alone, that she pays her bills honestly even when it's tough, that she has turned down my financial help dozens of times. Doesn't that tell you anything?" "It tells me she's smart," Beatrice retorted. "She knows how to play the game right. Makes you think she's too proud to accept help when she's really just waiting for the right moment to—" "Enough!" Richard's voice echoed through the office. His secretary outside surely heard. "You've crossed every line. Get out of here, now!" "Richard, I said get out." He had never yelled at his mother like that, never lost control in such a way. "And don't come back until you're ready to apologize, to me and to Sarah." Beatrice left, indignant and shocked, but Richard barely noticed. He was staring at the report on the table, feeling nauseous. Sarah was going to find out about this. She had to know, but how to explain, how to apologize for his family violating her privacy like this? He picked up the phone to call, but hesitated. This conversation needed to be personal. He checked his schedule. He had meetings until 7 in the evening. He sent a message. "I need to talk to you. Something serious happened. Can I come over after work?" Sarah read the message an hour later. Her heart sank. Something serious was never good news. She replied, I also need to talk to you. Come here at 8. The hours until 8 o'clock were agonizing for both. Sarah left Lily at Mrs. Thompson's house. The girl was grounded, but the neighbor had offered to watch her while Sarah dealt with adult matters. Richard cancelled his last meeting, unable to concentrate, the report burning a hole in his conscience inside his briefcase. When he finally rang the bell at Sarah's apartment at exactly 8, it was raining, that fine, cold drizzle of August that seemed to wash all the color from the city. Sarah opened the door, and Richard immediately saw that she had also been crying. The look they exchanged was heavy with fear and anticipation of what was to come. "Come in," she said, her voice hoarse. The apartment was tidied up in a way Richard had never seen. Sarah had clearly cleaned compulsively, her way of coping with stress. It smelled of strong coffee and disinfectant. They sat on the small sofa, a careful space between them. "You first," Sarah said. Richard took a deep breath, pulling the report from his briefcase. "My mom, she investigated you, hired a private investigation firm, got access to your financial records, your history, everything." He extended the report, unable to look at her. "I'm sorry. I don't have the words to express how much I regret this." Sarah took the report with trembling hands, flipping through the pages. Her entire life reduced to cold numbers and facts, every struggle, every hardship, every private moment of shame exposed for strangers to analyze. She read in silence, and Richard watched the color drain from her face. She even knows about the child support case I tried to file against Lily's father," Sarah murmured, her voice empty. "She knows he disappeared before she was born, knows exactly how much I owe on each credit card, knows," she paused, swallowing hard, "knows that I've gone hungry, that I've had my water shut off, that I've slept in the hospital because I didn't have gas to cook at home." "Sarah, and you read this?" She finally looked at him, and there was something broken in her eyes. "You read all these things about me?" "I did," Richard admitted, ashamed. "My mom forced me. But Sarah, none of this changes." "It changes everything." Sarah threw the report onto the coffee table. "Now you know exactly how financially messed up I am. You know every humiliating thing I've been through. And your mother thinks this proves I'm after your money. I don't think that." "Don't you?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Because your eyes say otherwise, Richard. I saw the way you looked at the report when you picked it up. I saw the doubt. For even a second you considered that your mom might be right." "No," Richard protested, but the lie was written all over his face. "I had a moment of... But it was just a second, Sarah. A second of weakness that I hate myself for having." "A second is enough," Sarah said, standing up. "It means that part of you, no matter how small, believes I'm capable of being with you for selfish reasons. That's not it." Richard also stood up, trying to get closer, but she backed away. "Sarah, please, my mom put that doubt in my head. But I know you. I know who you are." "Do you?" Sarah crossed her arms, defensive. "How long have you known me? 5 months, 6? And what if your mom is right? What if subconsciously I'm using you?" "You're self-sabotaging," Richard realized, "pushing me away before I can hurt you." "I'm being realistic." Sarah was crying now, tears of frustration and pain. "Lily got punched at school today because other kids heard their parents call me selfish, a gold digger, a loser. My 9-year-old daughter is being bullied because my cause. At the hospital, half the people don't talk to me anymore, and the other half only talk to me to try to get favors through you, and now your mother has investigated me as if I were a criminal." "Sarah." Richard tried to touch her, but she pulled away. "And you know what's worse?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Part of me wonders if your mother is right. If I'm unconsciously Drawn to you because you represent financial stability, because I would never have to worry about paying rent or buying food again, because Lily could have everything I always wanted to give her but never could." "That's not love," Richard said, feeling panic rise. "Those are practical thoughts anyone would have. It doesn't mean that's why you're with me." "But how do I know?" Sarah looked at him in despair. "How do I separate what I feel for you from the relief I would feel in not having to survive every day? How do you know I'm not lying to you and to myself?" Richard had no answer. He stood there, powerless, watching the woman he loved fall apart in front of him. "I think we need some time apart," Sarah finally said, the words coming out low but firm. "No," Richard said immediately. "No, Sarah, don't do this. We can work through this." "How?" she asked, genuinely wanting to know. "Your mother will always hate me. Society will always judge. People will always assume the worst. And Ethan and Lily, Richard, they are so connected now. If we continue and it goes wrong, it will destroy them." "And what if we don't try and throw away something that could be amazing?" Richard argued, desperate. "Sarah, I love you. I love you in a way I didn't think I was capable of loving anymore, and I know you love me too." "Love isn't enough," Sarah said, and those words broke something fundamental between them. Sometimes love isn't enough when the worlds are too different. "So what?" Richard asked, his voice breaking. "Do we just give up after everything?" Sarah closed her eyes and more tears fell. "I don't know. I just know I need time to think. Away from you. Away from all this pressure. I need to figure out who I am without you in the equation. If I can stand on my own without thinking. But what if Richard could help?" "How long?" "I don't know," she admitted. "A few weeks, maybe more." "And Ethan, Lily, they will ask. Let's tell them the truth, that the adults need to sort some things out and are taking some time." Sarah finally looked at him directly. "Richard, you also need to think. Really think. If you're willing to face your family, society, all the judgment for me, because if you have even a hint of doubt, it's better to end it now than later when we're more involved." Richard wanted to argue more, wanted to plead, wanted to promise that everything would be okay, but looking at Sarah, at her tired face, at her shoulders bent under the weight of it all, at the determination mixed with pain in her eyes, he understood that pushing now would be cruel. "Okay," he finally said, "time. But Sarah, this isn't the end. It's a pause. We'll come back to this, to us." She didn't respond, just opened the door. Richard walked up to her, hesitated, and then gently kissed her forehead. "I love you," he murmured. "No matter how long, that doesn't change." When the door closed behind him, Sarah slid to the floor, hugging her knees, and cried like she hadn't cried since she was 19 and found out she was pregnant and alone. She cried for everything that could have been. She cried for the injustice of worlds that didn't mix easily. She cried because she loved Richard Allen but didn't know if love was enough. On the other side of the door, Richard leaned against the wall of the narrow hallway, listening to the muffled sobs, and felt his own heart break. He had built an empire, conquered international markets, overcome obstacles that seemed impossible. But he didn't know how to fight against the doubt his own mother had planted, against the class differences so deeply rooted in society, against the fear that maybe, just maybe, they really were impossible. When he finally stepped out of the building into the cold August rain, Richard Allen, billionaire, CEO, man who had always had control over his life, felt completely, devastatingly powerless. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of everyone involved's lives. Sarah threw herself into work with an almost self-destructive intensity, accepting every extra shift that came up, going home only to sleep a few hours before heading out again. Lily, suspended from school, and then returning to a hostile environment, became quiet in a way that broke Sarah's heart. No longer the talkative, lively girl, but a smaller, more cautious version of herself. Richard was not better. Ethan had slightly regressed, anxiety attacks returning in smaller but constant waves. The boy asked for Sarah and Lily every day, and each time, Richard explained that the adults needed some time. He saw the light dim a little more in his son's eyes. "She's not coming back," Ethan said on a cold September morning, as they had coffee in silence. "Just like Mom. Everyone leaves." "That's not true," Richard tried to argue, but the words sounded empty even to him. It was Beatrice who, surprisingly, initiated the change. 3 weeks and 2 days after that rainy night, she showed up at Sarah's apartment unannounced. A Saturday morning, when Sarah was off and trying to convince Lily to eat something for breakfast. The doorbell rang, and Sarah answered with messy hair, still in her pajamas, ready to dismiss any salesperson. She didn't expect to find Beatrice Allen in all her glory. Italian wool coat, designer handbag, high heels even. Sarah felt determination replace doubt. "Let's get ready. We have a visit to make." An hour later, Sarah and Lily were ringing the bell of the penthouse in the Upper East Side. She almost changed her mind 3 times on the way, but Lily's small hand in hers gave her strength. Ethan opened the door and his whole face lit up. "Sarah, Lily!" he shouted, then turned back into the apartment. "Dad, they're here!" Richard came running, literally running, from the kitchen, his hair messy, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked like he had lost weight, with deep circles under his eyes. When he saw Sarah standing at the door, he froze completely. "Hi," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Hi," he replied, looking as if he couldn't believe she was there. Ethan and Lily exchanged glances, having a silent conversation with their eyes, and Ethan pulled Lily inside. "Come on, I'll show you the new comic books. Let them talk." When the kids disappeared upstairs, Sarah and Richard stood looking at each other, years of emotion compressed into 3 weeks of silence. "Your mum came to see me," Sarah started. "I know. She called me afterward. I didn't ask her to go, I swear." "I know," Sarah interrupted him. And she was right. About some things, not about me being with you for money, because that's a lie, but about me being scared. Scared of not being enough. Scared that one day you would wake up and realize that your family and friends were right, that I don't belong in your world. Sarah, let me finish, she pleaded, finally stepping into the apartment. They stood in the huge foyer, a careful space between them. "I've spent 3 weeks thinking about us, about class differences, about what really matters, and I realized something. I was letting the fear of other people dictate my life. I was giving up my happiness, our happiness, because I was afraid of judgment." "And now?" Richard asked, barely daring to hope. "Now I know they're going to judge anyway, that your mom might change her mind, but there will always be other Beatrices in the world, that my co-workers will talk, that parents at Lily's school will whisper." Sarah took a step toward him. "But I also know that I love you, that Ethan and Lily deserve to grow up seeing that true love is worth fighting for. That I deserve to be happy, even if my happiness doesn't fit into what society expects." Richard closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, pulling her into a hug so tight she could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry," he murmured into her hair, "for doubting, even for a second, for not fighting harder against my mom, for letting you deal with everything alone." "You were scared too," Sarah said, hugging him back. "I understand. But Richard, if we're going to try again, I need you to understand something. I will never fit perfectly into your world. I will always talk too much, be too blunt, choose street food pastry instead of a fancy restaurant. I can't change who I am." "I don't want you to change," Richard said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I want exactly you. The woman who spilled coffee on me. The woman who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being an idiot. The woman who taught me how to be a real dad. And you need to understand," Sarah continued, "that I'm going to have hard days. Days when I feel inferior. When I question if I deserve to be by your side. I'm going to need you to remind me that yes, we are equal, despite our different bank accounts." "Every day," Richard promised, "as many times as you need. And about Ethan and Lily." "They are ours," Richard said firmly. "Not my son and your daughter, ours. A blended family. Strange, improbable, but ours." Sarah felt tears, finally good ones, streaming down her face. "A strange but beautiful family?" Richard laughed, recalling Ethan's words at the museum months ago. Exactly like that. He kissed her, and it was different from the previous kisses. It didn't have the hesitation of the first or the desperate passion from the kitchen. It was a kiss of promise, of new beginnings, of a conscious choice despite all obstacles. "Dad! Sarah!" Ethan shouted from upstairs. "Are you back? Lily and I bet you would be." They pulled apart, laughing. "We're back!" Richard shouted. Back. The footsteps on the stairs were thunderous, two pre-teens rushing down at a dangerous speed. Ethan and Lily arrived breathless, huge smiles on their faces. "So," Lily said, trying to sound casual and failing completely, "does this mean we can go back to Saturday outings?" "It means," Sarah confirmed, pulling her daughter into a hug. "And maybe more. Maybe much more." "Like living together?" Ethan asked hopefully. Sarah and Richard exchanged glances. "One day," Richard replied, "when everyone is ready. You can't rush these things." "But are you going to get married?" Lily asked. "Lily!" Sarah scolded, blushing. "What?" "It's a reasonable question," Lily defended herself. Richard laughed, pulling Sarah back into his arms. "Maybe, one day, when your mum stops being stubborn enough to accept." "I'm not stubborn," Sarah protested. "You are," all three others said in unison, and she could do nothing but laugh. They spent the rest of the day together, the four of them on the huge couch watching movies, eating homemade popcorn that Richard learned to make from YouTube tutorials, their bodies intertwined in a comfortable family pile, when Lily fell asleep, leaning against Sarah, and Ethan dozed against his father's shoulder. Richard looked at Sarah over the kids' heads. "It's going to be hard," he whispered. "There will be bad days, cruel people, obstacles we can't even imagine yet." "I know," Sarah whispered back. "But will it be worth it?" "It will," Richard promised. "Every second will be worth it." The following months tested that promise in every possible way. The media officially discovered the relationship when Richard brought Sarah as his date to a charity event. The cameras captured everything, and gossip websites exploded with speculation. Beatrice kept her promise to accept Sarah, but the New York high society was not so welcoming. There were awkward dinners, veiled comments, and deliberate exclusion from certain events. At the hospital, Sarah faced both jealousy and genuine interest. Some colleagues distanced themselves, while others got too close, wanting favors. She learned to navigate both with the same fierce dignity she had always possessed. Ethan had relapses, moments when the fear of abandonment returned strong. But now, instead of shutting down, he talked about his feelings. Sarah learned to recognize the signs, Richard learned to be present, and together they built a safety net for the boy. Lily faced bullying at school until Sarah finally transferred her to a public school near Queens, where, ironically, she thrived. Away from class judgments, Lily could just be Lily, making friends who cared about who she was, not who her mother was dating. Richard created a scholarship program in honor of his late mother, funding the education of children of healthcare professionals. Sarah oversaw the program, ensuring it truly benefited those in need. It was the first project they did together, merging his world with her values. They didn't move in together right away. Sarah kept the penthouse in Queens. Her independence, her security, her proof that she could stand on her own. But they spent alternating weekends at each place, the children circulating between two worlds so different that they eventually became bridges between them. And on a suffocating February day in New York, exactly 14 months after that disastrous first meeting at the cafe, Richard and Sarah returned to Corner Cafe, the same table in the back, the same smell of freshly roasted beans, but everything was different. Ethan and Lily played in the small outdoor garden, laughing together, not two strangers anymore, but siblings in everything except blood. Sarah wore her nurse's uniform, coming straight from her shift, unashamed, unapologetic. Richard was without a tie for the first time in years, relaxed in a way he had never been before meeting her. "So," Richard said, holding her hand over the table, 1 year and 2 months. 14 months of craziness, Sarah agreed with a smile. Worth it. Every second, he replied without hesitation. Then he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Sarah felt her heart stop. "Richard, wait, before you panic," he said quickly, opening the box. Inside was not an expensive diamond ring, but a simple silver band with a small green stone. Emerald. Sarah's birthstone. "This is not a marriage proposal, not yet. It's a promise." "Promise of what?" "That I choose you," Richard said, his eyes locked on hers. "Every day, even when it's hard, even when my family teases or society judges, even when you get stubborn or I become a workaholic, I choose you, Sarah Miller, and I will keep choosing you until you are ready to officially choose me back." Sarah felt tears, always tears with this man, but they were good now. She extended her hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. "I already choose you," she said softly. "I choose every day too. You and your complicated, beautiful son, and this strange life we've built." He kissed her there, at the same table where everything had begun so disastrously, and when they pulled away, both were smiling. "Thank you," Richard said. "For what?" "For throwing that coffee at me, for forcing me to wake up, for teaching me that vulnerability is not weakness, for giving me a real family." He squeezed her hand. "For teaching me that true love doesn't come wrapped beautifully and socially appropriately. It comes with fighting, with challenges, with growth. And it's worth every hard second." Sarah looked around the cafe, at the people quietly conversing, at the barista preparing coffees, at the city outside, with all its complexity and inequality. She looked at the children in the garden, at the man beside her, at the simple ring on her finger. "You know what's funny?" she said. "When I woke up that morning 14 months ago, I was so tired. Tired of fighting alone, tired of surviving, tired of being strong. And I thought maybe, just maybe, that blind date could be something good. And was it?" "It was a disaster," Sarah laughed. "You were an arrogant jerk. I threw coffee at you. It should have been the end. But somehow it turned into the beginning of everything." "The best beginnings," Richard agreed, "because it forced us to build something real from the ground up. No shortcuts, no easy ways, just two stubborn idiots deciding it was worth trying." From the garden, Ethan shouted, "Are you two going to keep kissing all day, or are we going for ice cream?" "Always so romantic," Richard murmured, but he was smiling. "It's genetic," Sarah teased, standing up. They left the cafe hand in hand, the children bouncing ahead, and Sarah thought of everything that had happened, the struggles, the tears, the moments of almost giving up, but also the laughter, the lazy Sundays, the feeling of finally belonging to something. Their love was not a fairy tale. It was real, messy, complicated, built brick by brick, through conscious choices, difficult conversations, daily commitments. It was love that understood that class differences existed but refused to let that define who they were together. "Sarah," Richard called as they walked through Williamsburg under the February sun. "Yes?" "I love you. Today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too," she replied, squeezing his hand, "even when you're impossible." "Especially when I'm impossible," he corrected with a smile. And there on that warm afternoon in New York, with 2 children running ahead and 2 adults finally at peace walking side by side, Sarah Miller understood that she had found her home. Not in a place, not in a luxurious penthouse or a tiny apartment, but in a person, in a chosen, imperfect family, but deeply real. The kind of love that is worth every tear, every struggle, every moment of doubt, because in the end, when everything else fades away, what remains is simple: 2 people deciding every day that together they are better than apart. And this, Sarah discovered, was more than enough. It was everything.